Welcome to another deep dive. We're going to be looking at Jason Miller's Consorting with Spirits. It's a really interesting look at, interacting with spirits, but not in a spooky kind of way.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head there. Miller combines ideas and techniques from all sorts of traditions, Rosicrucianism, root work, even Tibetan Buddhism. To him, magic is like a universal language.
Interesting. So what exactly are we covering in this deep dive? I know we'll be talking about what spirits are, how they manifest, and the best ways to interact with them safely.
Right, we will. We'll also touch upon the different types of relationships you can build with spirits, including making pacts. And just so you know, this book is not for beginners. Miller expects you to know the basics like protection techniques and divination.
Got it. So let's get started. What exactly is a spirit? I know Miller talks about how science and psychology have changed how we think about spirits throughout history.
Yeah, he does. He starts by exploring different spirit models that have been used in the past. Like, there was a time when spirits were seen as projections of the mind, like waking dreams. Then you have the idea that spirits are energy patterns. These models were a way for people to try and understand magic as science advanced.
Yeah, that makes sense. So where does Miller stand on this?
He takes an animistic approach, suggesting that consciousness isn't limited to our physical bodies and can organize itself in many different forms, and spirits are one of those. Kind of like how water can exist as ice, liquid, or vapor, but it's all still water.
Okay, so consciousness can manifest in different ways, and spirits are one of those. That's fascinating. But are there different types of spirits? And if so, how can we categorize or understand those differences?
Definitely. Miller explains that spirits can be organized by their tradition, their location, or even their behavior.
Can you give us some examples?
Sure. He talks about encountering spirits tied to certain locations, like the ghost of this witch named Peggy Clevenger in the Pine Barrens of New Jersey, or even the Jersey Devil, which was summoned at a place where stunted pines overlook these pools of water based on local legends. He can only access these spirits in these specific locations, which suggests a strong connection to the land.
That's really incredible. It really pushes back against the idea that all spirits are floating around everywhere just waiting for us to call upon them.
You got it. He even shares an experience he had with the Shvanamukha sisters, who are spirits traditionally associated with a cave in Nepal, and while he could invoke them from anywhere, he found his interactions with them were much more powerful when he was physically in the cave.
So location matters.
Mhm.
What about spirits that are categorized by their behavior?
He gives the example of a spirit that represents addiction, a very powerful force that even has its own seal in the book. These spirits embody specific energies or concepts, kind of like the archetypes you see in mythology and psychology.
So we have spirits tied to places and spirits that represent concepts. It's like a whole world out there. But how do they actually make their presence known? How do we actually experience them?
That is where things get really interesting. Miller actually outlines 7 levels of manifestation, ranging from subtle resonance to possession.
Okay, so let's start with resonance. How does that work?
Imagine you're in a room with a bunch of guitars and you strum a chord on one and the others start to vibrate. That's resonance. You don't see the other guitars moving, but you can feel them responding.
So it's like a subtle exchange of energy. Can you give an example from the book?
Yeah, so when he invoked Peralda, the elemental king of fire, he didn't see anything. He just felt this sense of presence. This highlights the idea that spirit communication often starts subtly, like a feeling or a change in the atmosphere.
Makes sense. So what's the next level up from resonance?
Inhabitation. This is where a spirit temporarily takes up residence in something like an object or even a person. He recounts an experience he had where he worked with St. Cyprian through an image, and the image would move and communicate.
Wow, that's pretty intense. And I bet that leads to more advanced techniques like creating spirit houses.
You got it. But again, that's more for experienced practitioners. He also describes controlled appearance, which is basically getting a spirit to manifest in a visible form. He talks about summoning Astaroth when he was just 16 using a grimoire.
That's crazy. Did it work? What happened?
It did work, but not as he expected. So instead of appearing as instructed, Astaroth manifested as a hand on the back of his neck and a voice whispering behind him.
Wow, what a lesson at 16. Talk about a reality check. Spirits really do have their own agenda.
For sure, and that's just one level of manifestation. He also talks about the true spirit and the idea that the real essence of some beings is beyond human comprehension. Like our senses and language just aren't good enough to grasp it.
So we're just getting a small glimpse of how vast and mysterious this world is. We're going to need some serious skills to navigate it safely.
You're telling me. Miller is a big believer in meditation for spirit work, and he doesn't mean emptying your mind. It's about training your awareness to recognize the different voices in your head and then figuring out which ones are yours and which ones might belong to something else.
It's like learning to identify different instruments in an orchestra. You have to train your ears so you can distinguish the unique sounds they each make.
Precisely. Once you recognize your own mental music, you'll be able to pick out the voices of spirits more easily.
So meditation is key. What other skills does Miller recommend?
Dream work, focusing on having clearer dreams and remembering them better, that can help you pick up on messages spirits might be sending you while you sleep.
So it's like tuning into a different channel of communication.
Exactly. Then you have visualization, which Miller argues is more than just making pictures in your head. It's about engaging your imagination and will to actually interact with subtle energies and beings.
Does he give any exercises for this?
He does. For example, the pillar and spheres technique is all about visualizing the elements within your body, which can make your energy more receptive to spirit contact.
It's really incredible how these skills build on each other. So meditation for awareness, dream work for receiving messages, and visualization for interacting with those subtle energies. What else should we know?
He also recommends exploring techniques that can enhance your elemental awareness. However, he stresses balancing skepticism with acceptance.
So we don't want to just believe everything, but we also don't want to close ourselves off to new possibilities.
All right, you want to approach spirit work with a discerning mind. Don't dismiss experiences outright, but don't accept everything at face value either.
Okay, so we've got a better understanding of what spirits are and how they might communicate, but how do we make sure we're interacting with them in a respectful and safe way?
That's super important. It's really just like interacting with people. You wouldn't barge into someone's home demanding their attention. You would approach them with respect and try to build rapport.
So good manners are important in the spirit world too. But how do we go beyond manners and establish authority?
Miller talks about 3 types of authority in spirit work. There's granted authority, which comes from working within a specific tradition or calling on the names of powerful beings.
So it's like having a badge or a title that gives you clout. What about the other types?
Then there is forceful authority, which is basically using your magical powers to make a spirit show up or behave in a certain way. It's not about being bossy, but about having clear communication and control, especially with spirits that might be volatile or resistant to cooperating.
So laying down the law when needed. What about the last type of authority?
Earned authority. This one comes from your own spiritual development and the work you've done to cultivate personal power and understanding.
So it's not something you're given, it's something you earn. I like that.
Absolutely. It can come from years of practice or through spontaneous experiences that Miller calls the lonely initiation. These are unscripted encounters with the spirit world that change you fundamentally and bestow a level of authority that spirits recognize.
Can you give an example of a lonely initiation?
He mentions the Swedish Year's Walk, where practitioners go looking for spirits in graveyards on Christmas Eve, or certain rituals in the Pine Barrens that involve connecting with a specific spirit in the forest.
Oh, that sounds intense.
Ah,
So these experiences earn you respect in the spirit world.
exactly. But the authority you gain is reflected in your actions and interactions, not in how loudly you proclaim it.
Humility goes a long way, it seems.
Absolutely. Miller also emphasizes building mutual respect with spirits. It's all about creating a relationship where everyone feels acknowledged and valued. He even has a ritual called the Spirit Feast, which is designed to foster good relationships with a whole range of spirits.
What does that involve?
I don't want to give away all the details, but it includes purifying yourself and your space, preparing offerings for deities, guardians, local spirits, and even those you might have offended accidentally. It's about making space for genuine connection and reciprocity.
That sounds like a really powerful practice. But what about the traditional ways of talking to spirits, like prayers and spells?
Miller sees those as 2 different things. To him, prayer is like a one-way request, while spells are actions that solidify your intent.
So it's not just about asking for something, but actively putting your energy behind it.
Exactly. He talks about how a basic prayer can become a more formal spell by adding things like visualizations offerings and physical actions, like making a talisman.
Does he give any specific examples?
Yeah, he highlights the sorcerer's call to Saint Cyprian, which is a prayer that invokes this saint as a middleman for working with spirits. But he stresses that how effective any prayer or spell is depends on your relationship with the spirits involved.
Makes sense. You're more likely to get a good response from someone you know and get along with. It's like asking a favor from a close friend versus asking a complete stranger.
For sure. And speaking of connections, Miller encourages you to explore the spirits in your own backyard. the ones that are tied to your land and its history. He talks about his own experience connecting with the spirit of Peggy Clevenger, the Witch of the Pines, who we talked about earlier.
I remember. He couldn't connect with her at his temple, right?
Nope. He was guided by Hecate to try different places that had to do with Peggy, and finally made contact at a three-way crossroads after receiving guidance from some local nymphs.
What a great example of being flexible with your approach and listening to the guidance of other spirits. It's like you're a detective using your intuition and your magic to figure out the hidden pathways in the spirit world.
Absolutely. Miller wants all of us to be those detectives and check out the magic in our own areas. He gives all sorts of different techniques for this, things like dowsing with the pendulum or doing rituals in specific locations.
Does he give any examples of places we should be looking for?
Graveyards are really important places of power, and he says that the spirits of the dead can be very helpful allies. He even talks about how to find and interact with the master of the yard, the spirit that watches over the graveyard. Really interesting stuff.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We know what spirits are, how they might show up, and some basic skills for interacting with them. What about dangers? Does Miller talk about the risks of all of this?
He does. He's very clear that there are risks and compares it to interacting with people. Not every spirit is harmless or trustworthy, just like people. He says protection magic is important, but warns that relying on it too much can give you a false sense of security.
So what's the best defense then?
Understanding and experience. He talks about how pop culture often makes things scarier than they are and reminds us that knowledge is power when dealing with the spirit world.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, we've covered a lot, but there's so much more to learn. Let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll talk about specific types of conjurations and that fascinating concept of pacts.
Welcome back. I'm really excited to talk about some of the more hands-on stuff in Miller's book, especially conjurations. He talks about friendly conjurations and compelling conjurations. They're very different approaches.
Okay, that's interesting. What exactly is the difference between a friendly conjuration and a compelling one?
Okay, so a friendly conjuration is like inviting someone over to your house. You make a welcoming environment, offer them snacks, and just have a nice conversation. You're hoping they'll be nice and want to work with you.
So it's about being nice and asking the spirit to help you out.
Hmm.
What about compelling conjurations? They sound a bit more intense.
Yeah, they can be. It's more like giving someone a direct order. Like you're using your magic to force a spirit to show up and do what you want. Miller really emphasizes that you should be careful with this and only use it if you absolutely have to.
Yeah, I can see why that would be a sensitive topic. So it's not about bossing spirits around for no reason.
Exactly. It's about setting some ground rules and being in control, especially when dealing with spirits that can be unpredictable or don't want to cooperate.
Does Miller give any examples of these different types of conjurations?
He does. He describes his experience with summoning Visaga using a friendly approach. He goes through all the steps, how to prepare and what happened. It's a really great example of how to create a respectful interaction that benefits both you and the spirit.
What about compelling conjurations? Does he give any examples of those?
Yeah, he walks you through conjuring Astaroth using both Abrahamic and Hecaterian methods. It shows how the words you use in the invocation can really change the way the spirit reacts.
Wow, that sounds really fascinating. So the words you choose, the tradition you're using, all of that has an effect on how the spirit responds.
Exactly. It shows how powerful language and ritual can be when you're interacting with spirits.
Okay, so we have these two approaches to conjuration. But what about the spirits themselves? I know there's a lot of fear surrounding spirits, especially those listed in grimoires.
Yeah, Miller talks about that a lot. He doesn't believe that all spirits from grimoires are evil, and he wants people to think about their nature in different ways.
That's really refreshing. It's like judging an entire culture based on a few news stories.
You said it. It's about moving past those stereotypes that are based on fear and trying to see these spirits with an open mind, trying to understand where they're coming from.
Okay, so conjurations are all about interacting with spirits directly. But what about spirits that act as like guides or middlemen? Does Miller talk about working with them too?
He does. He talks about intermediary spirits and familiars and how they can help us communicate with other spirits.
So they're like spiritual translators?
Exactly. He compares it to having a personal concierge who helps you navigate a foreign country. He talks about different types of intermediaries, like the Holy Guardian Angel from the Abramelin Grimoire, as well as other system-specific spirits and even saints.
Wow, that's a pretty wide range.
Hmm.
Does he talk about how to actually connect with these intermediaries?
He talks about his own experience connecting with his Holy Guardian Angel and how transformative that practice was.
That sounds really amazing. Are these intermediaries always necessary? Can't we just connect with other spirits directly?
Sometimes you can, especially with spirits that are connected to your local area or spirits you already have an affinity for. He even has a ritual for finding a familiar spirit and says that these relationships often happen organically through practice and a willingness to connect.
So just being open to those connections and trusting that the right spirits will find you.
Right. But like with any spirit interaction, he says that discernment is key.
Hmm.
Not all spirits that say they're intermediaries are actually good, and it's really important to be critical and evaluate those relationships.
So you have to be careful and not blindly trust every spirit that comes along, even if they say they want to help.
Absolutely. He talks about an example where he ran into a spirit that said it was a senior angel in John Dee's Enochian system, but it turned out to be a fake.
Wow. Like they say, all that glitters is not gold.
You got it. A good reminder to stay grounded and remember that even in the spirit world, not everything is as it seems.
Okay, so we talked about conjurations, intermediaries, and how to be careful. What about pacts? I know that's a big topic in the book.
It is. And it's something that gets talked about a lot in pop culture. But he says pacts aren't about selling your soul or making deals with demons.
That's good to know. So what are pacts really about?
They're more like agreements built on mutual respect and exchange. You offer the spirit something valuable and they help you with a specific goal.
Like what kinds of things?
It could be anything from lodestones to acts of charity or even dedicating something you made to the spirit. You're trying to find a way to match what you want with the spirit's nature.
So you're not trying to use the spirit or force them to do things for you. It's more like working together.
Exactly. But he does say to be careful. You have to be clear about your intentions, set boundaries, and make sure that the pact benefits both sides.
Sounds like good advice for any relationship, not just with spirits.
You got it. And he says that pacts aren't one size fits all. The details will change depending on the spirit you're working with, what you want to achieve, and the relationship you have with them. It's about finding a good balance, a back and forth of energy and intention.
So how do you know if making a pact is the right thing to do?
That's a question only you can answer. But Miller wants people to take charge. He says we have the power to shape how we interact with the spirit world. It's not just waiting for them to contact us, but reaching out and engaging with them on our terms.
So taking control of your own spiritual journey and making conscious decisions about how you interact with this unseen world.
Exactly. And this leads us to a really important part of spirit work, understanding how spirits talk to us. They don't always use words that are easy to understand.
So how do we hear them then?
They might use subtle impressions, dreams full of symbols, intuitive feelings, or even synchronicities that happen in your daily life.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's like trying to pick up on little whispers from the spirit world while all the noise of our everyday lives is going on.
You got it. He encourages us to pay attention to things that seem random, like coincidences that might actually have a deeper meaning. It's about learning to recognize those little signs that spirits use to get our attention.
Does he give any advice on how to tell these messages apart from our own thoughts and desires? That seems pretty tricky.
He says it's important to develop your intuition and learn to trust your gut. Real spirit communication usually guides you toward growth and transformation and helping you find your purpose.
So if it sounds like something that's just stroking your ego or promising an easy solution,
Yeah.
it's probably not coming from a helpful spirit.
Right. It's about staying grounded and remembering that true spiritual growth takes work and looking inward.
This is all so interesting. But we can't ignore the elephant in the room. Fear. A lot of people are scared of the spirit world, especially after seeing all those scary movies and all those stories in the media.
Yeah, that's understandable. Miller talks about that fear directly. He busts a lot of myths and reminds us that spirits aren't inherently bad or out to get us.
So it's not like those horror movies where all the spirits are vengeful ghosts.
Nope, not at all. He says working with spirits is a lot like dealing with people. It takes discernment, common sense, and respect.
Okay, that makes sense. What about protecting ourselves? What does he say about that?
He talks about protection magic, like using wards and setting boundaries. He also talks about the importance of having strong relationships with guardian spirits.
So there are things we can do to stay safe, but it's not about being scared all the time or always expecting the worst to happen.
For sure. He cautions against becoming too dependent on protection because it can make you paranoid and actually make it harder to connect with spirits in a genuine way.
So it's about striking a balance between being careful and being open, respecting the potential dangers, but also trusting yourself to handle them.
Exactly. And just like with people, he says that setting clear boundaries is really important. If a spirit is acting up or making you uncomfortable, you have the right to stand up for yourself and stop interacting with them.
So we can tell a spirit no, just like we would to a person who was crossing our boundaries.
For sure. It's all about listening to your intuition and remembering that you have the power to choose who you interact with in the spirit world.
This has been an amazing deep dive so far. We've learned so much about the world of spirits, what they're like, how they behave, the practical skills you need, and the ethics of working with them. But I know there's still more to talk about.
Absolutely. We still need to dig a little deeper into things like preparation,
Yeah.
the tools you can use in spirit work, and answer some common questions that people have about all of this.
I'm really excited to hear more. So we talked about all these different ways to interact with spirits, but Miller's also big on preparation. What's he say about that?
He really believes in setting the scene for spirit work,
Right.
purifying yourself and the space, getting your tools ready, and really being clear about what you want.
It's making a sacred space both inside and out.
Right. And he even gives you simple ways to consecrate your tools.
Right.
He says it's not about doing these big fancy rituals, but about putting your intention into the objects.
Yeah, it's like getting dressed up for a special occasion instead of just wearing whatever.
It's actually showing respect and setting the tone for the whole interaction.
That makes sense. What about tools? Does he recommend any specific tools for spirit work?
He mentions things like mirrors and crystals and even using the edge of a magic circle as a focal point for the spirit to manifest. But he says the best tools are the ones that you connect with and the ones that work best for the spirit you're trying to reach.
So there's no one magic toolkit that works for everyone.
Nope. And he even tells a story about how he summoned Astaroth and she showed up looking totally different from what the grimoire said.
Always good to be flexible and expect the unexpected. Speaking of grimoires, Miller has a pretty interesting take on them.
Yeah, he doesn't think we have to follow the instructions in those old books exactly.
Right.
He wants people to be more eclectic and pull wisdom from different traditions and adapt the methods to fit their needs and the spirits they're working with.
So it's not about blindly following the rules, but understanding the ideas behind the magic and doing what feels right.
Exactly. He says magic is a living thing. It's not stuck in the past.
That's a great way to put it, finding what works for you while still respecting the people who came before us.
Okay, so we've covered a lot, but I'm sure people still have tons of questions about spirit work. Does Miller talk about that at all in the book?
He does. He has a whole section where he answers common questions and worries, and he uses his own experiences to give some really practical advice.
Like what kinds of questions? All kinds of things, like how to tell if you're really talking to a spirit or if it's just your own thoughts and desires, and how to recognize and deal with toxic spirit relationships. He says it's important to find a balance. Don't be too skeptical, but don't just believe everything you hear.
So being open-minded, but still thinking critically.
Exactly. And he says that you don't have to do this alone. There are a lot of experienced practitioners and even spirits themselves that can help you. It's about building a support system as you learn and grow on this path.
This deep dive has been absolutely amazing. We've learned so much about the world of spirits, how they work, how to interact with them safely and ethically. It's been fascinating.
It really has. And while we've covered a lot, this is just the beginning. Miller's book gives you the tools and the knowledge and a peek into what's possible. But the real magic happens when you take what you've learned and go out there and experience it for yourself.
So what's the one thing you hope people take away from this deep dive?
I hope they'll walk away with a sense of wonder and curiosity and respect for the spirit world. It's a huge, mysterious place with incredible beings and tons of opportunities for growth and transformation. Don't be afraid. Embrace the unknown with an open mind and an open heart.
That's beautiful. And remember, like Miller says, magic is alive. It's always changing and evolving. So go out there, explore, try new things, and see what works for you. Who knows what amazing things are waiting for you on the other side.
Happy consorting, everyone.